All right, so everybody, thanks for listening. If you are listening to us on one of the 30 radio stations, we appreciate that. And again, thank you for listening, and tell your friends and your family members about that. And if you are listening to us on the YouTube, please share this interview. And if you could subscribe, we'd appreciate that also. Try to give good interviews from politics, sports, all kinds of different things. Again, thanks for listening, regardless of where you're listening. Again, for people listening, this is Jessica De La Cruz. She is a Republican state senator from District 23. She's the Senate minority leader in Rhode Island and a rising star in the Republican Party in the state of Rhode Island. Jess, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you today.
Thank you for the invite. I'm happy that we can make it happen.
All right, so let's kick this around. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what made you get involved in politics?
Well, I mean, there's the long story and then the short story. So the short story is really a culmination of events that led me to run for office, and obviously being a mom really brought to the forefront some issues that I had not considered before, like education. My kids were going to be going to schools that weren't really performing well, and I thought, well, I must be able to use tax dollars to send them to a better school, and that wasn't the case. So we had to make a decision. Can we afford private school? No, we couldn't. So we decided to move and sell our house and move to a better district. I mean, with better schools. So that worked out for us, but not all families able to do that. Taxes were really high. And I mean, taxes still are very high. And then there was an issue with constitutional rights that I had. I had to take a case. I had to, not me personally, but an attorney, take it to the Rhode Island Supreme Court. And that was surrounding a license to carry a concealed firearm. And, I'm a squeaky clean kind of gal, like no criminal record or anything like that. So it was just like that one issue was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. So I met Sherry Roberts of the House at an event one night, and she encouraged me to run for office. And I said, no, I don't like politics. I don't like politicians. I think it's really dirty business, and I don't want to get involved. And she said, yep, that's all true, but she goes, that's the reason why you should get involved. And if it wasn't for her, and really those situations that led me to meet Sherry, I wouldn't have run for office. So
can you tell people that are listening whether you consider yourself a conservative or a Republican, and regardless of which one you consider yourself, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think labels make it easy for people to judge others.
Right.
So they'll say, well, you're this or you're that, and I'm guilty of saying, oh, that person's a progressive, whatever, and it's usually you make the determination based on how that person votes and what your definition is. So I think people, I've had people in this chamber call me a moderate. I have people call me a conservative. So sometimes it's like, I don't know, how you see a person, but when I registered to vote, so my parents are immigrants to the United States, and they you were very grateful to become Americans eventually. And so when I was old enough to vote, I went to register at East Providence High School because they had a voter registration drive. And I remember the lady saying to me, Democrat or Republican? And I didn't know what a Democrat or Republican was. So I said, well, what is it? I don't know. What's the difference? And she's trying to explain it to me, to this almost 18-year-old girl. And you would think that maybe my civics class would have taught me, or some kind of government class, U.S. history or something. But so there was a lot of kids, and she's trying to get through, getting people registered. And so she says, you know what, honey, we're all Democrats in this state. You should probably just register as a Democrat. And I joke around and I say that my distrust for government was birthed at that moment. And I said, in my mind, having a conversation, I don't know what either one of these are, but I know what an unaffiliated is. So I was an unaffiliated voter for many years. And because I voted mostly Republican, at one point, I had just decided, well, I vote mostly Republican, so I'm just going to stop disaffiliating and stay a Republican. So that's how I came to really to join the Republican Party.
I was a part of the Kayla's campaign. I know you were the chairwoman, and I heard a lot of good reviews from Evan. We talked earlier, I think it was a couple of days ago, Sunday, I think we talked for about an hour and a half, and he gave you rave reviews. So, you know,
Wow.
he's a good dude. So, now bringing you on and to speak about this, let's talk about 2022. It seemed like, and I interviewed Aaron Gucci and James Lathrop, those guys were very qualified for their positions in general. And it just seemed like some of those people, and obviously I'm very partial to Ashley, met her quite a few times. I think she was the right person for the job. And we need an outsider in the state. My personal opinion, we've had a lot of insiders throughout the years, and they cannot produce. So I prefer an outsider now. And obviously the state didn't agree with that, but par for the course on that one. We'll move into the question. What do you feel like happened in 2022? Because talking to Evan, he said that day, election day, they thought they were going to win, and there was polls that said that Ashley was within the margin of error, down by 3. The DGA, threw 260-ish thousand the last 3 days into that campaign. What happened with Ashley's campaign, but even down the line with Gookie and James, who were very qualified also?
Yeah. Well, my guess is that, well, first of all, I would say I want to know who these posters are because I never want to use them because they were so, I mean, like we're talking about across the country too, right? But
Right.
I think that when we're looking at the numbers, at least in North Smithfield, the voter turnout was low. And I think that obviously hurt Republicans. I think having the primary very late, the way that we do, doesn't benefit, doesn't really help candidates because, I mean, you have what, 7 weeks to turn your campaign from primary mode to general election mode. So I think that's a hindrance as well. But I think that a low turnout, but I also think that the practice of mail ballot harvesting,
Mm.
I'm not a fan of it. I think it's actually kind of predatory. You're at a nursing home or a facility and you're, peering over somebody's shoulder and collecting ballots. Like I don't like it, but I think that's something, unfortunately, Republicans are going to have to do, not peering over people's shoulders, but they're going to have to do mail ballot harvesting or emergency ballot harvesting, whatever it is, or that Democrats seem to do so effectively. And it is the law. And as long as Republicans follow the law, then we need to adopt collecting mail ballots.
Senator Jessica De La Cruz here on the program. She is a Rhode Island State Senator from District 23, a Senate Minority Leader in the state of Rhode Island. Jess, as we keep going into this, what can be done about the mail ballot issue? You just went into that a little bit earlier on, a few questions ago. It just does seem like it's ripe for fraud, and not to just beat the dead horse because you did just speak about it. Is there anything that you guys can do? I know the numbers are really not there, but can you guys do anything with that, or is it just not?
There's so
Yeah,
many Democrats. I don't even call them the majority. I call them the supermajority in the
right.
Senate. And so, I'll give you a story. I sat in judiciary and I listened to hours of testimony of individuals come in and testify against the election changes that we made. And I took a tally of every call that was for and every call that it was against, and it was over 100. That were against the piece of legislation. And maybe, like, I think I have it probably in my file somewhere, maybe like, 20 that were for. So it was an overwhelming, and these were people from around the state. It wasn't just from the western part. And I named off all the towns that I got emails from, Barrington, East Providence, Johnston, Westerly, Newport, like all over the state. And they were very much against the legislation, but it sailed through with no problem because those election changes were wanted by leadership and the members in the body, and so it passed easily.
how does the Republican Party in Rhode Island win again? And, get people like me that maybe were Democrats. So you spoke about those JFK Democrats, even the young people. Seems like the young people can be influenced if you have the right people, the people like Charlie Baker, like Larry Hogan of Maryland. These are very moderate Democrats. And, Charlie Baker won by over 20 points in 2018 in his reelection campaign. Obviously, he didn't run this time, but are these the candidates we need? The moderate, right people like you that they're not these right wing nut jobs, but they're in the middle and they do hold some conservative values too.
I think it's a perfect storm, to find the candidate and but also how they run their campaign. I think there's so many variables, so there's no like magic recipe. But I do think that there are certain things that candidates need to do, and I tell candidates all the time, if you're not willing to knock on every door in your district, then don't waste everyone's time. Don't waste your time, your family's time, because it's very time consuming to run for office. So especially like locally, or I would say, General Assembly members, governor obviously can't do something like that. But you got to meet the voters where they're at. You got to knock on their door. You got to meet them face to face. When I got into politics, again, I told you, I was not, I listened to the news because, I had to, because I wanted to be informed, but I wasn't, I didn't have it on 24/7 because I would just get so frustrated. I'd have to shut it off. So I just think that, people are kind of like that, and you need to meet them at their door. And I thought to myself, if I get to talk to people, we can have a conversation and, find common ground. And I think that's what happened. Even like towards the end of my election, I'd stop into the corner store in Gloucester, and the owner would say, don't spend any time in here. You keep talking to people, because every time they talk to you, they really like you and they connect with you. And I think that's important. You got to connect with the voters. You got to talk to them. And at the General Assembly level, you can.
But how do you get these young people that, like I'm frustrated, I'm fed up with, the woke and the COVID BS in plain English. But how do you get some of these people? Because we need to get some young people in the Rhode Island Republican Party. It's not as good of a turn. I mean, the Kalis campaign did extremely well. They did have a lot of young people in that campaign. You go into the campaign headquarters in Warwick, there was always tons of young people in there. But for the most part, the left does have all the young people. Let's be honest with each other. How do we do
Yeah.
that in Rhode Island?
Well, I heard it one way. It said, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. But if you're not more conservative when you're older, then you have no brain, or something like that, right?
Right.
When I was young, I didn't like the taxes taken out, but I'm like, yeah, whatever, it is what it is. But it wasn't until I had kids and that they were going, and my oldest was going into school, that the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh my goodness, my town councilor, city councilor, my school committee members, the members in the General Assembly have immense power. And, they have more say in my life, more so than the president of the United States. And, most people just pay attention to national politics when really they should be paying attention to local politics just as much. So I think it's different for everybody. I've talked to other people who it was like when they got their first job, they were like, what? The government's like taking all my money, So I think everyone has that light bulb moment different times in life. And it's just keep getting our message out there, keep talking about it. Hopefully, something at some point will stick with someone, and then they're able to influence their circle, their sphere of influence. So I think that's the way. I think that's the way we do it, is with messaging. But with that, you have to be consistent.
Yeah.
When I started my Facebook page, it's just Facebook, but it's an outlet to give information to Rhode Islanders, to my constituents. And I had individuals say, "Oh, don't do that. That's a waste of your time." But I don't think so. I think that it's important to I don't have a news camera asking me questions all the time about legislation that we're working on, and there's thousands of pieces of legislation. So, take it upon yourself to educate the voters on what you're doing and what you believe.
Bless you.
Tickle my throat.
Oh, okay. Anyways, we'll move on to some of these questions. So we did get a lot of questions in here for you. I'm going to just pick the ones that are relevant about Rhode Island issues. There's a lot of people dying right now, Senator, because they can't get into a hospital. There's people dying waiting to get into the hospital. There was an 82-year-old that died about a week ago. There's people that are, trying to get into hospitals for mental health issues. I have a good friend of mine. She works at Butler. She said if you have a mental health issue and you go in there and it's nothing serious, like you're gonna, God forbid, do any harm to yourself, they just throw you right back out. Same thing in Cranston at Slater Hospital over there. They just throw you right back out. What can we do? Because a lot of this is the understaffing, and also the doctors are not here in the state because of reimbursement issue. But a lot of this is due to the vaccine mandates. And that's why the understaffing is there, because they fired all these people that didn't want to get the shot. And now I don't know if they're allowed to work back. I'm assuming they're not, because there's still mandates in these hospitals. Is it time to drop some of these mandates so people can actually get some good care in the state of Rhode Island and not die waiting for, or if they don't die, they're waiting 7, 8 hours for an appointment to get into these hospitals?
Yeah, it's absolutely. My doctor just retired, and do you know how difficult it was for me to find a physician that
Mhm.
was going to take, our family?
The governor's on
Um,
vacation right now. Governor's on vacation and the state is going to hell.
and then I actually said to the secretary, um, I said, well, I asked her, a hypothetical question about, refilling some prescriptions. And she said, and just if there are any issues, like if anyone gets sick, just go to the hospital. I was like, go to the hospital. That hospital is going to turn me around and say, listen, this, go get some like over the counter meds, or go to urgent
Yes.
care. It's like, that's horrible advice because our hospitals are just, they can't handle it. I think that it's not just one issue, because if it was just one, we could say, well, that's it, let's pinpoint it and we fix the problem. I think the reimbursement rate is a huge problem. It's hard to do business in Rhode Island because you're not being compensated properly for your services. And then I think the mandates, I've always said from the beginning, I'm pro-vaccine, but I'm anti-coercion. And to say, like the Department of Health said, oh no, that had no bearing on the crisis that we're having. No, it does. We were already in a crisis, but what the Department of Health did and what the governor did was make the situation so much worse. And I don't know if you recall, but during COVID, Eleanor Slater Hospital, they were so understaffed that they called back individuals who were COVID positive, that tested COVID positive, but were feeling okay. Maybe there were no symptoms present. They came in over unvaccinated, healthy individuals that were COVID negative. They sent in COVID positive individuals to care for our most vulnerable patients in the state. I mean, if you're at Eleanor Slater, you're there because you are one of the most vulnerable people in the state. And do you know what happened? COVID took off like wildfire at Eleanor Slater. That is incompetence. And do I think that, I know healthcare individuals who have gone back to the healthcare field. Some of them have found better jobs in Massachusetts and are not coming back to Rhode Island. So
It's
there's
terrible.
that.
It's really disgusting what's going on. And the governor's on vacation again, and he just won a campaign. I'm sure he wants a break too, but the
Yeah.
state is falling apart. Something definitely needs to be done. I want to talk about this. During the campaign, you did call to get rid of the gas tax. This is still a big problem in the state of Rhode Island. I mean, I
Yeah.
know all around Johnston and Providence, it's 350, 360, 370, and even higher in some other areas in the state. you know, I know the governor obviously didn't go into special session for that, and you know that as well. What can you do in January of 2023 when the session goes back into session to try to get something, some sort of relief for the taxpayers of Rhode Island as far as that goes?
Yeah, we would love to see the gas tax suspended, and we'll be submitting that again.
Okay.
Um, uh, last Thanksgiving is when I started to see prices start going up on really on so many goods. And I remember watching the news saying Thanksgiving dinner is going to cost this much more than it did years ago. And, obviously costs increase year to year, but when you have a spike, a large spike, that's caused, to pause and, reevaluate and, you know, uh, the governor's already going to be starting to submit some budget documents for finance, it's the committees. Um, and they're talking about, more money into the state. And it's like, what you need to do is not implement new programs as a state. What we need to do is give that money back to Rhode Islanders who are struggling.
Right.
It's so hard right now. Like I feel fortunate that, even though I feel the pinch myself, that I can still afford my groceries, that I don't have to cut back on the things that I'm accustomed to buying for my family. But filling my tank, I have three kids, so I have one vehicle with a third row and one that's an economical vehicle on gasoline. It costs so much money to fill up my tank. And sometimes I'm driving a lot because I have three kids. So I might have to fill up my tank twice. That's a lot of gas. Then my groceries, I'm not exaggerating, but sometimes it's double of what I used to pay. And then you're just talking about like now my electricity and my gas, 40% increase. Like, how do you expect people to survive? And aside from the gas tax, Republicans put in an amendment to increase the funding to LIHEAP, which is funding for those who are struggling to pay for their heating. And Democrats shot that down too. So heating assistance, they were like, no, no, thank you. Gas tax relief, nope, no, thank you. They just totally dismissed it, didn't want to. And I'm thinking, we have so much money and people are going to suffer. Why don't we give back that money to individuals? So, I think we saved a few dollars on our electricity bill, but our electricity bills are going to go up. So, I mean, that was, that's great, but it wasn't like, I just don't feel like it's enough, like substantive enough. And then, people with children got $250 per child, but what about the elderly person on a fixed income? What about, a couple that just is just the two of them? Like, why can't we give tax cuts that benefit everybody?
And I want to get to this because the
Go.
COVID state of emergency was just extended by the governor to January. That's obviously that's money coming into the state from the federal government through the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
And you said this, the money is flowing in. And, there's the talk of the soccer stadium and all that other nonsense, but money is not going back to Rhode Islanders. What's going to happen to the state when eventually that COVID state of emergency is going to go bye-bye and that money's going to go bye-bye too? And you still have the money for the soccer stadium, the affordable housing, homelessness issue, and then obviously more people are on government assistance right now because, like you just alluded to yourself, people can't afford to get groceries, the gas, not to mention health insurance, car insurance, home insurance. I mean, this is all money that's being pushed out and people can't afford those car insurance too. What's going to happen is the governor was talking about how the past 18 months have been so great. Is the next 18 months going to be the downfall where we're going to see a mass exodus of people leaving the state of Rhode Island because they can't afford it?
Yeah. When people tell me things have been so great, I say to myself, well, you must be very affluent if you can't feel the effects of what's happening in the economy of the recession. So that person, whoever says, yeah, they're just out of touch with reality. Things are not okay. People are struggling. Yeah, there is a mass. I mean, even during COVID, I remember people telling me, "Oh, I'm going to sell my house and leave," and that was probably maybe like 7 or 8 people, and I believe them. And then there are people that just leave that don't tell you that they're leaving. But it's a serious problem, and I really hope that those crafting the budget with the governor take steps to help Rhode Islanders.
Mhm.
And then once the House and Senate get it, we'll take it to Finance Committee and then, sift through all the papers, not papers, but through all the pages of his proposal and come to some sort of agreement on what should be funded and what shouldn't be funded.
So let's end on these last three questions, Senator. You know, there's a lot of colleges in Rhode Island: Rick, PC, Johnson Wales, Roger Williams, and URI, of course. With that said, a lot of the students that go to school here, they leave. They don't want to be back in Rhode Island. It could be somewhat of they want to go to the warm weather. Maybe there's other more opportunity in other states, or they just can't afford it. What can we do to keep these kids from all these different colleges in the state of Rhode Island here? Because a lot of them have a lot to offer.
Yeah. I think that, we'll use Brown University as an example. They have the medical school there, and then
So,
we train these great physicians, and then they leave. Well, is it profitable to do business in Rhode Island? It costs money to go to college, so you got to pay off your loans, and it's going to cost to live, in the state, to buy a home, to start a family. So reimbursement rates, I think, help with that, because then you can open a practice in Rhode Island. You can join, another doctor's office as a physician and work with other colleagues. Like, I think that's an issue. Housing, of course, again, supply and demand. I think comes down to the more houses that are built. People might leave that starter home and move into something a little bit bigger, and then that opens up that starter home for someone else. So I think, again, building some policies in order to make business profitable. And some people hear profitable and they think, oh, evil, it's evil. It's not evil to be successful and profitable. Like, you gave a lot. You went to med school. You sacrificed so many years in education, and so you should be compensated fairly for your work. So
but
I think those things.
But shouldn't there be incentives for people that do go to these schools and they want to stay in Rhode Island? Doctors, nurses. I know you brought up specifically Brown, obviously URI. Rick has a good teaching school.
Nursing
Keep
too.
these teachers in Rhode Island. And if you have to give them a rake off on their student loans or, help them with housing, whatever it may be, just to keep them in the state so that we can be better than Massachusetts in education. So we do have a thriving medical, medical issues here that from Brown and other places. So is that talked about in the legislature or no?
So we talked about it in education committee, and I had said, I come on and said, there are professions in which we like the teaching. We need teachers. So why don't we, and as an incentive, say we're going to pay X amount of your loan, or we're going to pay all of it if you remain in Rhode Island, or if you teach for so many years, or I don't know exactly how
Sure.
it would look, but let's start talking about how we can make that happen, because these are professions in which we just need teachers, right? We need mental health therapists. Mental health therapists, don't make tons of money. Like, they don't walk away, 100K. I mean, maybe if they have private practice and they're always working, but a lot of therapists that I've talked to say, I maybe make like $60,000 a year, and then they have to pay off their student loans. So, like, we can do that. We can incentivize, and I'm not against that. The one issue that I did have was what Providence decided that they were only going to offer loan forgiveness to minorities. So if you were a white teacher, you were flat out of luck, because they weren't going to. And so that the discrimination thing is a
Yeah.
problem with me. And actually, I think someone's bringing a lawsuit against the city of Providence, because it's clearly discriminatory.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And we can't go back and forth with this race stuff. We're all in this together. We all got to help each other out, and all this black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, silliness. We're all in this together. We all live in the same country. It's the same thing with businesses, though. We cannot get a lot of businesses here. And you brought this up throughout the conversation, too. The taxes, the regulation. Again, we're not against regulation, as you said, too. There has to be some sort of environmental regulation, and, they have that in every state. But it's the point where there's too much regulations where businesses say, well, screw it. So how do we get businesses here? Is it the incentives, but then it runs into the tax money of, how, we're going to
Yeah.
give. Yeah, go ahead.
I think if we make it affordable means it's profitable for them. And remember, these aren't evil business owners. These business owners employ people. They give them a wage. Then, and you're working full time, you're getting health insurance and you're getting vacation time, and you're able to have stability and be able to, then buy a home because you have stable employment. So we want businesses to come to look at Rhode Island and say, coming to Rhode Island, the tax structure is fair. There aren't, we're not going to give millions to soccer stadium and not help out the mom and pop shops. Like we want fair treatment for businesses.
Senator, you hearing a lot though about school issues too, that a lot of these businesses don't want to come here because, they have kids, these people that own businesses, and if the schools stink, they're either going to send them to private schools or they send them to a crappy public school. They don't want to do that. So they have to send them to a private school. So I think the objective is to try to get these public schools to be the best they can be and not have just these schools that are good public schools in Barrington or, Newport or, Smithfield, North Smithfield. We need these schools all over the state that are good public schools so we can bring these businesses and they'll want to keep their kids and their families here because they'll be going to those good public schools.
Yeah. I think that we need to give families, this is a different, this is a longer conversation, but
Sure.
yeah, as a parent, my number one concern is they're my children. How are they going to have a better life than I have had, a better life than my parents had? So when I make a decision, I'm basing the decision on how does this affect my family? And anyone who has kids feels the same way. So 100%, if you're going to be moving to Rhode Island, you want to know what kind of schools are going to educate your children, or are you going to have to pay for private school education? And not everyone can do that. So, maybe it's a topic for another day, but I think that if you're in a failing school, that you should have the option to use your tax dollars or use the funding that we have available to students to send them somewhere else. Because, I sit in an oversight committee, and some of the students, depending on which school and which grade, have a 3% proficiency in math or reading. And if you have that many students that cannot read and cannot do math, how do you expect them to hold a job? How do you expect them to advance into, start, at an entry level position and then move their way up? If you can't read, and statistics, I believe, say by third grade, maybe it's fourth grade, but it was a study that I read by Harvard that said if you are not reading at level, if you're not proficient in reading and at grade level by that point, you're going to be behind. You're going to be behind the eight ball. It's going to be very difficult for you to catch up. So I think that if that's the case, students don't have 10, 20 years for us to fix the problem. They need options now while we fix the problem. And then we can reassess in the future.
Last question, and thank
Sure.
you so much for your time. The 2023 session is coming up in January as far as that goes. What are you guys going to push as far as the Republican caucus, or even yourself if you're pushing bills personally that you want to get done?
Well, definitely trying to cut the gas tax again and helping Rhode Islanders who are feeling really the pinch their finances. We want to help them because there are family, like my mom, my aunts and uncles. Like I have family, you have family. We all know somebody who's affected by these high prices. So we want to put forth legislation to help Rhode Islanders, but also I think education is really important. And you just talked about, I think that kids in failing school districts, it's not fair to them to trap them because you're trapping them. You are you are prohibiting them from being successful adults. And I was talking to one business owner during the election, and he said, Jess, I have to help some of my employees fill out simple paperwork because they can't read and they can't write, and they just graduated from Providence. And it's not just Providence, it's Central Falls, it's Pawtucket, it's other areas in the state. And although we have great schools, you know, there are schools in Western Rhode Island that are suffering as well too. It's not just the urban core. So I would say those, and then you know, I have other pieces of legislation like privacy, data privacy, and you know, protecting one's information, digital information. So I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that I'll put in, but you know, it's just to bring awareness to these issues.
Right. Well, again, for people listening, Senator Jessica De La Cruz, she is the Republican Senate Minority Leader, and in the state of Rhode Island, I should say. Jess, as we end, how can people follow you on social media? I know you talked earlier about Facebook. I know you have a Twitter account. If you just want to advertise that for the people listening as we end the interview.
I appreciate that. So on Facebook, you can find me at Senator Jessica De La Cruz. And then on Twitter, Jessica 4RI, Jessica FORRI. But also on my website, jessica4ri.com, I have legislative updates that I do regularly during session about bills that are coming up that might be important to individuals, you know, like how you can testify, you know, or even just send an email to the committee, let them know where you stand on the issue if you don't want to or you can't come in. But at least you'll know some of the things that are happening at the State House. There are thousands of bills, so I don't go over every bill, but the ones that I think you know, that voters really want to know about, I let voters know. So sign up for my legislative updates if you want to follow what's happening at the State House.
Senator Jessica De La Cruz, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.